I jolted awake to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. Groggy, I squinted at the screen, an alert from my security system. My stomach knotted as I swiped to check the footage. The grainy night vision showed a shadowy figure moving along the side of my house, bending over near the sprinkler valves. A soft clinking sound played through the audio feed, followed by the unmistakable slosh of liquid pouring. I threw off the covers and rushed outside, barefoot on the dewy grass. The sharp scent of chemicals stung my nose before I even saw the damage. Under the glow of my porch light, I could see the telltale yellowing of my lawn. Not just a patch, huge streaks of dead grass curled in on themselves, their edges burned a sickly white. The realization hit me like a gut punch. Someone had poisoned my lawn. A throat cleared behind me. I turned to see my neighbor, Greg, standing at the edge of his driveway, arms folded. He nodded toward the damage. "Thought I saw someone messing around last night," he said. "Figured it was some drunk kid pulling a prank, but this?" He whistled low. I showed him the security footage, fast-forwarding to the moment the figure leaned down and poured something into my sprinkler system. When I zoomed in, the porch light from across the street illuminated the person's face for a brief second. My breath hitched. Karen. The self-appointed queen of our HOA, Karen was the kind of person who lived for rules, so long as she didn't have to follow them herself. She'd been after me for weeks about my lawn, claiming it wasn't up to neighborhood standards. Never mind that it was trimmed and green. To her, it wasn't perfect, and in Karen's world, that meant it was unacceptable. Greg let out a low chuckle. Of course it's her. I should have guessed. I clenched my jaw. She really thinks she can get away with this. She always does, he muttered. HOA protects their own. You gonna do something about it? I inhaled deeply, my pulse hammering. Oh yeah. But first, I need to hear her say it. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 8 a.m., as if summoned by some internal clock, Karen strutted down the sidewalk in her usual morning routine, leggings, oversized sunglasses, and a phone clamped to her ear like a lifeline. The moment she saw me examining my ruined lawn, she stopped and slowly pulled off her sunglasses. A smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "Oh dear," she said, voice dripping with fake concern. "Looks like your lawn took a turn for the worse overnight. That's such a shame. You know, if you just followed the HOA's landscaping recommendations, this might not have happened." I fought the urge to throttle her. Instead, I pulled out my phone and hit play on the security footage. Her face barely flickered before she scoffed. "That could be anyone," she said. "Dark footage, bad angle. Honestly, it's irresponsible to accuse people without proof." "You poured bleach into my sprinklers," I said, voice level. She folded her arms. "Even if I did, which I didn't, you can't prove it. And frankly, if your lawn can't handle a little, unexpected challenge, maybe you're not fit to live in this neighborhood." I took a slow step forward. "You really think you're untouchable, don't you?" Karen leaned in, dropping her voice to a whisper. "Sweetheart, I am the HOA. I write the rules. You just live here." I stared at her, memorizing every inch of that smug expression. Then I smiled. "Good to know," I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. "We'll see who's really in charge soon enough." Her smirk faltered for just a second. But that was all I needed. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the next few days gathering every scrap of information I could on Karen and the HOA's policies. The more I dug, the more I realized she wasn't just a nuisance, she was a tyrant. Every neighbor I spoke to had a story. Janet from 3 houses down had been fined for having a bird feeder that attracted undesirable wildlife. Mr. Lopez was threatened with legal action when his Halloween decorations stayed up a day past the arbitrary deadline. And Greg? He'd been slapped with a warning when his front door color clashed with the aesthetic harmony of the street. Karen ruled with an iron fist, twisting regulations to serve her personal vendettas while exempting herself from the same scrutiny. But her biggest offense? Her lawn. It was flawless, too flawless. Lush, emerald green, not a single blade out of place. Even in the peak of summer when the rest of us battled brown patches, hers remained pristine. At first, I assumed she had some expensive maintenance crew. Then Greg let something slip. "She's tapped into the underground irrigation system," he muttered, watching Karen chat with a landscaper in her driveway. "Her sprinklers run off the same line as half the block, but she rerouted the pressure so her lawn gets priority. It's why our water pressure drops every time she runs them." I stared at her property, the pieces clicking into place. Karen had sabotaged my lawn, but in doing so, she'd unwittingly set herself up for the perfect downfall. The next step was testing my theory. That night, I turned on my sprinklers for a few minutes and watched Karen's lawn from my upstairs window. Sure enough, her sprinklers sputtered to life at the exact same time. A slow grin spread across my face. She had no idea our irrigation systems were connected. Over the next week, I set my plan into motion. First, I installed hidden cameras, small, well-placed, and high-resolution. If she tried anything again, I'd have undeniable proof. Then I contacted a soil specialist to test my lawn. The results came back exactly as expected: high levels of bleach, confirming that someone had deliberately poisoned it. This wasn't just petty HOA bullying, it was vandalism. But the real fun started when I began baiting Karen into a false sense of security. I made a show of giving up, letting my lawn wither further while sighing dramatically whenever she walked by. I even muttered about how I couldn't afford professional restoration, just loud enough for her to hear. She took the bait immediately. At the next HOA meeting, she stood at the podium, beaming in victory. "It's a shame when homeowners don't take pride in their properties," she said, barely disguising her glee. "Some of us put in the effort. Others, well, they let their lawns die and bring down the whole neighborhood." Several people shot me apologetic glances, but I stayed quiet, pretending to be defeated. Meanwhile, I was already preparing the final phase of my plan. That night, under the cover of darkness, I adjusted my irrigation system. It took hours of careful work, but when I was done, the results would be worth it. The next morning, I paid a visit to the local gardening center and picked up the strongest industrial bleach I could find. Not to pour on Karen's lawn directly, that would be too obvious. Instead, I had something far more poetic in mind. As I stood at my sprinkler system, bleach in hand, I let out a satisfied breath. Karen wanted a perfect lawn at any cost. It was time she paid the price. At dawn, I poured the bleach into my sprinkler system, careful to measure just the right amount. Too much and the smell might tip her off. Too little and it wouldn't have the full effect. The key was subtlety, just enough damage to be undeniable but slow enough that she wouldn't notice until it was far too late. I turned on my sprinklers and stepped back, heart pounding as I watched the mist rise into the air. A few seconds later, across the street, Karen's lawn absorbed the same lethal dose. She had spent years using the HOA as a weapon to control everyone around her. Now her arrogance had built the perfect trap, and she had walked straight into it. By midday, the first signs appeared. It started with small patches of yellow near the edges of her property, almost unnoticeable unless you knew where to look. Karen, oblivious, stood in her driveway chatting with another HOA member, waving her arms in exaggerated motions as she no doubt complained about some other minor neighborhood infraction. I watched from my porch, sipping my coffee, barely suppressing a smirk. The next morning, the damage had spread. More patches of brown crept through the perfect emerald green, the grass curling and drying in ugly, uneven streaks. Karen must have noticed because, for the first time ever, she actually inspected her lawn instead of smugly admiring it. She crouched, running a hand through the dying blades, her lips pursed. I had to bite my cheek to keep from laughing. By the end of the week, her lawn was a disaster. The damage spread in jagged, chaotic lines, creating an ugly patchwork of dead grass, streaks of white, and the occasional sickly yellow hue. It looked diseased, like something had infected it from the roots up. And Karen? She was unraveling. I saw her storming up and down the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, barking at her landscaper. Then came the desperate attempts to save it. Sprinklers running at full blast, sacks of fertilizer being poured onto dead patches, frantic raking to air out the soil. But nothing worked. The damage was done. On the fourth day, I finally decided to pay her a visit. "Looks like your lawn's seen better days," I said, strolling up her driveway with exaggerated sympathy. Karen spun, eyes wild, her perfectly controlled demeanor cracking for the first time. "Someone sabotaged it," she hissed. "This doesn't just happen." I tilted my head. "Really? That's strange. Kind of looks like, I don't know, bleach damage." Her face went pale. I saw the gears turning in her mind, the memory of my ruined lawn colliding with the reality of her own destruction. But she caught herself, lips pressing into a thin line. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "I take care of my property. Unlike some people." I shrugged. Shame. It was the best lawn on the block. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, fists clenched at her sides. That night I sent the footage. Every resident in the HOA group chat received the same message. A crystal-clear video of Karen pouring bleach into my sprinkler system. Along with it, a short message. Asterisk, seems like karma works faster than the HOA. Asterisk. The reaction was immediate. Neighbors who had been silent for years suddenly found their voices. Messages flooded in, people calling her out, demanding answers. Greg added a side-by-side photo comparison, my dead lawn, then hers. The resemblance was undeniable. Karen tried to respond, but every excuse crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Within minutes, she left the chat entirely. But the real spectacle happened the next morning. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and for the first time, Karen wasn't the one leading it. She sat stiffly in the front row as the board reviewed the footage, murmurs of disapproval rippling through the room. Every smug grin, every condescending remark she had ever made came crashing down in real time as her own arrogance played against her. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. Karen was stripped of her position as HOA president. The moment the decision was announced, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I followed at a leisurely pace, watching as she stomped toward her house, hands shaking with rage. Before she disappeared inside, I called out to her one last time. "Guess you were right, Karen," I said, barely containing my grin. "Some people just aren't responsible homeowners." She whirled, her face contorted in fury, but I was already walking away. I didn't need to hear her response. I had already won. Karen didn't show her face for days. The morning after her humiliation, her car was still parked in the driveway, but the curtains in her house remained drawn. For someone who used to patrol the neighborhood like a self-appointed queen, she had suddenly disappeared. No smug morning walks. No passive-aggressive emails to the HOA. No surprise visits from inspectors, conveniently targeting people she disliked. Her absence was its own kind of victory. But I wasn't done watching her downfall. The internet had taken care of that. By the time the footage of her sabotage made it to social media, the reaction was instant and brutal. The neighborhood drama had become public spectacle, spreading beyond our HOA into local forums and even catching the attention of a few viral meme pages. People online dubbed her Bleach Queen Karen, and before long, screenshots of her HOA emails, ones that neighbors had secretly saved over the years, were circulating for the world to see. She had built her power on fear and control, on the idea that she was untouchable. But now, she was a joke. The HOA board, eager to distance themselves from the mess, went into damage control. They reversed several of Karen's most ridiculous fines and sent out a formal apology to the neighborhood. A few members even reached out to me personally, promising that things would be different now. I didn't care about their sudden change of heart. I knew they weren't sorry for what had happened, just sorry they had hitched their wagon to the wrong person. Karen, though, had bigger problems than the HOA. A few neighbors, myself included, had already reported her actions to the city. The evidence was undeniable. Within a week, an official inspector arrived, clipboard in hand, taking notes as he examined my lawn and, of course, hers. I watched from my porch, arms crossed, as Karen stood stiffly in her yard, trying to explain away the dead patches and the obvious chemical damage. It didn't work. By the time the inspector left, she had a hefty fine and a legal complaint hanging over her head. Destruction of property wasn't something she could sweep under the rug with an HOA meeting. There were real consequences now, ones she had no power to escape. I thought that might be the end of it. Then the for sale sign went up. One morning, just like that, it was there, planted in the middle of her ruined lawn like a white flag of surrender. A few neighbors came out to watch, murmuring to each other, some shaking their heads in mock sympathy. "She really thought she could get away with it," Greg muttered beside me, hands in his pockets. "She did get away with it," I said, watching as Karen's blinds twitched from behind her window. "For a long time." He chuckled. "Yeah, well, took her down in the end, didn't we?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Karen had undone herself. The house sat unsold for months. The market was strong, but no one wanted to deal with an infamously cursed property. Between the scorched lawn, the viral humiliation, and the city fines, Karen had backed herself into a corner with no way out. The last time I saw her was the day the moving trucks arrived. She didn't say goodbye. Didn't look in my direction. Just climbed into her car, face tight with barely contained rage, and sped off down the street without a glance back. I stood there for a long time, watching the dust settle in her wake. Then, with a satisfied breath, I turned on my sprinklers, just to enjoy the sight of her dead lawn one last time.